Now, another party hoping to hoover up any independence votes are ALPA, formed in 2021. They have yet to have a representative elected under their banner. Will this election be the one? Their leader, Alex Salmond, is with me here in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
You're not going to be elected because you're not standing. Why?
Because I'm set my sights on the Scottish Parliament in 2 years' time. And in terms of other folk getting elected, I think we've got excellent chances in a number of seats. I mean, let me on that debate next Tuesday, and that will increase ALPA's chances.
Will it? OK, we'll see. I tell you who could be elected is Douglas Ross, and he could be your MP where you are in a very last-minute change of arrangements. Would you have stood against him if you'd known that was what was going to happen?
No, I'd set my sight on that seat in the Scottish Parliament. I actually announced it the previous day. That's Bamshire and Buchan Coast. Douglas Ross isn't going to be elected. I think I know the area pretty well.
He says he does too. He represented part of it for a long time.
A small part of it. But I mean, look, I think it doesn't really matter. But what matters is the fact that he has stabbed David Duckett in the back in the most reprehensible manner. I've never seen anything like it. And neither has the North East of Scotland. He's going to get his comeuppance. Absolutely going to get his comeuppance. I mean, there's another story about him in the papers today. I don't know if it's true or not. But what's going to do him down is the idea that you can betray one of your colleagues while they're lying critically ill in hospital. It's unbelievable.
The Conservatives say Douglas Ross had nothing to do with that deselection. I should say he's not here to defend himself.
He could always have said as leader, no, David Duckett wants to stand, so let him stand. I mean, this is totally indefensible. You know it, I know it. But more to the point,
right.
The corner, the North East of Scotland knows it.
Yeah, look, we're talking with lots of people too much about other parties. Let's talk about you and your party. Are you still a credible force in Scottish politics, Alex? I mean, you're probably the best known of all the figures we'll interview in this studio on a Sunday morning, but are you still credible as a political force? Well,
we're 3 years old as a political party, give us time. I mean, I'm trying to remember, it took the SNP, 15, 17 years to elect their first parliamentarian. We're going on a shorter timescale than that. Yes, we're credible. We've got some great candidates. We've got 6 parliamentarians, ex-parliamentarians, Westminster and Scottish, standing among our 19 plus 1 candidates, the 20 candidates we're backing. So we're a credible force, and even as your pollster indicated, the last 2 polls in the Scottish Parliament, list vote, would give us seats in the next Scottish Parliament.
You're not doing as well as Reform in a lot of polls. I mean, they're a younger party than you, are they not?
Well, the Reform has the great benefit of appearing in all the television debates. But listen, our campaign is going to be in the ground. I'm not sure how Mark managed to estimate the ALPA vote, because in most polls don't list ALPA. And even ones that do, like Redfield and Wilton, I'm not criticising them because at least they list us and show us gaining seats in the Scottish Parliament. They do it after others and don't know us. So let's just see what happens on the ground.
What's your estimate of the ALPA vote? You must have the data.
Oh, I think we're going to do great. I think we're going to have substantial results in a number of seats. I think people should remember 2 things.
History suggests you're wrong in that.
Well, let's talk about history. Neil Hanvey won his seat, County from Kirkcaldy, as an independent nationalist, didn't he? He won it having been disowned by the SNP. That's how he won it. And Kenny McCaskill's fighting the campaign that Scotland should be fighting to save Grangemouth Refinery. So these are just 2 of our candidates out of the 20, but we've got some excellent prospects, and you'll see ALPA making its mark in this election.
All right, well, what's your offer then? If I'm a pro-independent supporter, why vote for you and not for the SNP?
Because we're the party which unambiguously believes in independence. You make your vote count for independence. This is the first election since 2003. Well, the SNP have been trying to avoid the constitutional issue, the independence issue. 2003 was the last time John was leader, incidentally, and it was a disastrous election. It's a simple, fundamental point. If the SNP wants to compete to win an election, they have to make sure that independence is the key issue of the election. They might do very, very well, as we've done in a number of elections, the SNP, or they might do just quite well. But unless you make independence and the Constitution the defining issue of the campaign, you shall lose. But that's what's happening to the SNP.
Under John Swinney, essentially what John Swinney is saying is we've tried a whole load of approaches towards independence. None of them have worked. Let's go for a slower approach. Let's make good governance show through. Yeah, well, he is saying that, isn't he? He's saying, without actually giving us these figures, he's saying, let's get approval, let's get support for independence up to whatever it is, late 50s, 60% consistently, to an extent to which you can go and present that to Westminster and they can't say no anymore. If they win this election, what would you do? What would your approach be? How do you achieve independence?
Let's take to it. Let's disagree with the premise of your question. I mean, you've just announced an SNP strategy. I haven't heard a single SNP candidate with a strategy for independence.
That seems to be his thinking.
Well, look, this is the first election, probably in the SNP's history, where they haven't had a strategy for trying to achieve Scottish independence. It's the first election for 20 years where it's not been the dominating issue. We believe that every election, every national election, in the absence of a referendum, which we're not going to get, every national election should be defined as a mandate for independence, and the independence parties, including ALPA, should put on the ballot paper, this is a mandate, we're seeking a democratic mandate for independence. With that mandate, which means a majority of the popular vote, then you face down Westminster and you bend it to the will of the Scottish people.
But the SNP has won every national election for the last 14 years in Scotland and has claimed that as a mandate and has gone to Westminster and said, look what we've got, and Westminster has said, back in your box. What's different with you?
Well, there's two things that are different. One, you can't claim it afterwards. You have to say that up front. You have to say this is it. The SNP have just decided to take independence off the ballot paper, despite the fact they had a conference vote last October to put independence on the ballot paper.
But you putting it on the ballot paper doesn't mean you could deliver it.
Well, we're arguing that if there's a majority vote in an election for independence, then the Scottish Parliament should take that as a democratic mandate to initiate independence negotiations with Westminster. And how do you do that? Well, you use and mobilise domestic and international pressure to bend Westminster to the will of the Scottish people. That's what you have to do. And we've had many a press conference we have set out what that pressure would be, Martin. We have an independence strategy. That's what makes us worth voting for.
Let me ask you what I asked Patrick Harvey about independence. Are you not putting the party before the cause? Your votes could be very disruptive, as Mark Diffley said, in a lot of very marginal constituencies. Your votes away from the SNP could be the ones that hand those constituencies to Labour in central Scotland, to the Tories perhaps in the North East. Does that play in your conscience? No,
not at all, because the SNP aren't campaigning on independence. They are avowedly not campaigning on independence.
But they're a pro-independence party, and it's your life's work.
And nor do I believe the Greens are a serious independence party. But the issue is this. Mark Diffley said he thought the independence vote, correctly you pointed to the 15-20% of independent supporters who are, according to current indications, not going to vote SNP. He thinks they're starting to vote Labour. I think some of them are, but the majority are going to stay at home. They're not going to vote. They're disillusioned, disenfranchised. ALPA's appeal is to that disenfranchised 15-20%. We want people, instead of sitting at home, to get out and vote for ALPA. Instead of voting for the Unionist Labour Party, to get out and vote for ALPA. That's our appeal. That's why, well, Martin, it's very important this, because our argument is we're mobilising a vote that's been disillusioned. We're going to mobilise the independence vote, not split it.
But you're trying. I'm going back to my previous point. You're kind of leading them back up the same hill they've been up many times before, and they're weary, are they not?
No, there's never been
independence. Yes, but 10th in my list of priorities.
I can't remember the general elections in Scotland for some considerable time. It would be a novel thing for independence parties to say we're seeking a popular mandate at a national election. That's what we should do. I haven't led, incidentally, any independent supporter up and down any hill. When I was leader of the SNP and First Minister, I delivered the independence referendum that I promised to do.
What happens if the SNP, what happens to the cause of independence if the SNP lose this election in Scotland?
I think there'll be a substantial and early transfer to ALPA, and I think, of course,
what happens to the cause of independence if they lose it? Is it gone for years?
No. The health of the cause of independence is not the issue. Independence is supported by around 50% of the population. It's the health of the political parties who are meant to be advocating independence that's the issue. I mean, back in the day when I won the election in 2011, right, with an absolute majority in a proportional parliament, only 30% of people believed in independence, but we grew that because we campaigned for independence. So what will happen is that if the SNP suffers a reverse, and it looks like they're going to, hopefully with votes coming to ALPA as an independence party, then the SNP will look to their laurels. They'll start to say, well, we cannot compete as some sort of quasi-devolutionist party, and they'll go back to their independence appeal. Incidentally, they know that full well. I was sent a letter this morning, a begging letter, a financial appeal letter from the SNP. A friend sent me it. It mentions independence in a single letter in 4 paragraphs 7 times. So when they're looking for money from independence supporters, they talk about nothing else but independence. When they go on television debates, the word never crosses their lips.
Does it help you if they lose this election?
No, what helps us if Alapa can start to register serious support at the ballot box. That's what's going to help Alapa, that's going to help independence, that's what's going to help Scotland.
What's the best outcome for you in this election? Are you looking at winning seats?
Well,
if so, which ones? Where are your targets?
Well, the best outcome would be to win seats. I've already said Neil Hanvey's got an excellent chance in Cowdenbeath-Kirkcaldy. Our campaign in Grangemouth's a national campaign. The independent nationalists who are supporting the Hillian Year, Angus MacNeil, is a fine member of Parliament and agrees with us absolutely in the Constitution. But we've also got another, 17 excellent candidates coming forward, arguing the case for independence with mobilising campaign teams, which in turn will mobilise the voters.
Let me ask you quickly about stories on the front page of Scotland on Sunday today. Universities chief calls for review of free tuition. Let me just sub the first paragraph. One of Scotland's most respected university leaders has called for a review of universal free tuition to find a compromise model that secures the future of our higher education institutions. Are the rocks melting in the sun, Alex Salmond?
No, not if I have anything to do with it. Paul Grice, who of course spent most of his career in the Scottish Parliament as an administrator, should know a lot better. He knows what the feeling was in favour of free education in Scotland and how that redeemed a long-standing hope of the Scottish people. What is upsetting university finances just now is the UK government's refusal to allow the requisite number of overseas students to come, because the model in which Scottish universities...
Are we too reliant on that? I mean,
well, no, we're not too reliant.
Have you created a policy that has actually jeopardised the future of our further education system?
No, what's jeopardising the future is governments that won't invest in it. The point is now you need a balanced model of why shouldn't we have overseas students coming to our universities?
Well, what if China suddenly says, sorry, you're not going to British universities anymore?
No, it's the greatest thing, because there's plenty of people...
30% of the students at Glasgow University are Chinese.
That's not the problem just now. The problem is not lack of applicants. The problem is the UK government won't let them in. It's as simple and as devastating as that. So I say two things. One, let's have control over these things so we can get talented young people coming to be educated in Scotland to mix with our own people and getting a fantastic education. And let's invest in the universities so that every qualified Scot gets the opportunity of further higher or university education.
Last question. Stephen Flynn answered this in one word. I'd be grateful if you would too. You're off to the Euros next week. If Scotland aren't playing, will you be supporting England?
Oh, well, I'll support the best teams. I often do that.
Will you support England when they're playing, Mr. Salmond?
Probably not, because two things. One thing England never is in tournaments is an underdog. But sometimes they play like an underdog.
They're favourites.
Well, exactly, and I always tend to support underdogs. But listen, the question is academic, because obviously Scotland are going. We will qualify, and we will win.
Crikey. Big words from a man who's got a history of making big promises.
Are you going to lose?
Alex Salmond will hold you to that. Maybe we'll see you over there. Thank you very much indeed for that,
Pleasure.
Alex Salmond.